Welcome to a tutorial video on Unity 2D basics. In this video, I'm going to talk about jumping and collecting. Now, before I continue, I want to note this is actually part 4 of a video series on Unity 2D basics. The first video, Physics and Forces, covered the different physics, rigid bodies, box colliders, as well as applying force to a game object to move it. The second one, Tile Maps and Tile Collisions, talked about adding a tile map, adding a tile palette, and then using the tile map to draw on the screen in the different grids, and then using a tile collider 2D to work with our existing game object to collide against it, creating a floor and a wall, 2 different tile maps. The previous video, Camera, Follow, and Update Methods, built on those same ideas and added an additional script, Camera Script, that allowed the camera to follow the player game object as it moved through the world, as well as we talked through the 3 different update methods: update, fixed update, and late update. Update updates every frame, fixed update is associated with physics, fixed and physics have similar names, and late update, which is called right before everything is drawn. So finally in this video, we're going to talk about 2 more abstract concepts: jumping and collecting. These aren't actually part of Unity itself, but it helps us to talk through a major concept within Unity as it applies to our platformer game we've been slowly building across these videos. So you may have noticed in our little platformer example, the very first video we were using the horizontal axis to check for horizontal movement. But if we do up or down, it doesn't really work now that we're using gravity. That doesn't apply as well, because gravity will be forcing it down, and we could tweak with gravity and the force applied to it and the speed, and maybe work it to a way to sort of launch ourselves before gravity pushed us back down. But we don't want to deal with any of that, and that's not really how jumping works anyway. We don't keep forcing ourselves up to jump. That's not how jumping works. At the same time, we want to actually move into starting to collect things as well. What we want to do is we want to, when we collide with certain game objects, increase the score and then have that game object disappear or be destroyed. So we've got these 2 sort of competing ideas we want to put into play within this video. The first is we want to jump, and the second is we want to collect things. Well, luckily, like I said, they both deal with the same general idea, and that is tags. But before I get too far ahead into that, though, let's start to put these into practice, and then I'll talk about how tags come into play. So the first of which is I'm going to cover these in reverse order. We're going to move into jumping last, and we're going to start with collecting things and having a type of score that's updated as a result. So to do that, in the hierarchy view, I'm going to go to Create, UI, and then Text. It's going to add multiple things to my hierarchy view. The first of which is a canvas, because canvas is something you can draw UI elements on. So we need that, similar to when we added a tile map and it automatically added a grid for us. This time it added a canvas and it added the text game object to that. It also added an event system, which we're not necessarily going to interact with in this video. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure canvas is highlighted, and I'm going to drag it up to main camera, and I'm going to wait till the little icon updates underneath the cursor to put under. So now my canvas is a child of main camera. Text is a child of canvas. Canvas is a child of main camera. Well, what does this do for us? Well, let me show you. If I play this exactly how it is now, well, notice down here, although it's very, very hard to see, is this gray text, new text, that's on top of a gray background, unfortunately. But if I move, the text moves with me. So by having the canvas be a child of the main camera and having a text be a child of that, then anytime the transform is updated, which our script now does, anytime the player moves, the camera also is updated in its own transform. The text transform and the canvas transform are also updated at the same time. Any game object that is a child of a parent game object has the same transform. So when the position updates of the camera, when it starts to move to follow the player, the canvas and the text both have their positions updated at the same time. So text is moving along with the player, which is what we want to happen. We want our text information that's going to be on the screen, our score, to sort of follow the player. It went part of the camera, so when the camera moves, the text is part of it. So we've got that set up together. So the first thing I'm going to change is I'm going to come down to text, and we're going to make sure it's not gray anymore. So I'm going to click on the text within the hierarchy view, go to Inspector, scroll down a bit, and to look for color, click on it, and when it gives me a color wheel, I'm going to change this to white. So now it shows up even stronger. So now it's probably a lot easier to see where it's white text down here on top of the gray text. Well, I'm going to click on Canvas within the hierarchy view, and I'm going to change how it does layouts, because I don't want the text in the bottom left-hand corner. I actually want it at the top. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to add a new layout to this canvas. Canvas, again, are things you can draw UI elements on. So with Canvas selected within the hierarchy view, I'm going to move over to the Inspector view, come down to Add Component, then go to Layout. Now I want any extra text I add to actually be stuck into vertical columns. So what I'm going to choose is Horizontal Layout Group. And that's going to automatically move the text to the upper left-hand corner, and any extra things we add, any other UI elements we add to this canvas, will be sort of in their own vertical columns across from left to right. So now I'm going to scroll down where it says Horizontal Layout Group, and it says Padding. I'm going to add some extra padding to the left, and that will move my text in that amount, and then some extra padding from the top, 30, to move that in as well. So now we have a layout group, horizontal layout group, associated with the canvas. So that means anything that's in that canvas, any children of that, will have to use this layout group automatically. So we actually see that with text is as part of this layout group. And in fact, if I scroll up, we see as part of its transform some values driven by horizontal layout group. So it just tells us that its values are being overwritten by the horizontal layout group we've now associated with Canvas. So Canvas has a layout group which affects anything that's part of that. Right now text is part of that, so it's affected. So we've got this text going on up here on our game screen preview, and if we play now, we see when we move, it moves with us, which is exactly what we want to happen. So we've got our layout group as part of the canvas, and then we've got text as part of that, and canvas and text are both children of main camera, so when main camera moves, they move too. Well, that's all well and good, but now we need to actually do something with this. Well, so that was sort of the first step. The next one is, let's add something to collect. I'm going to create a new game object, but in the hierarchy view, going to create 2D object, sprite. It added a new sprite to the hierarchy view. Over in the inspector view, I'm going to rename this coin. And press enter to save. So we've got a new sprite game object with the name coin. Well, similar to in the very first video when we had our initial sprite game object, it needs to be able to draw something. It needs some type of image data, something to draw, or otherwise it's just invisible. So coming down here in the project view, I'm going to click on Images, because it's going to be a new image, Create, go to Sprites, and this time click on Circle. I'm going to leave this as the name Circle, so I'm going to press enter. So now I have some new circle it's created for me as part of my images. So everything's still organized. All of our images are in the images folder. So now I'm going to come back to coin and click on it within the hierarchy view, and I'm going to click and drag circle to the sprite value of the sprite renderer for the coin game object within the hierarchy view. So I made sure coin was highlighted within hierarchy, and I clicked and dragged the circle over to that. And you notice it immediately showed up on the screen because now it has some image data associated with it and it can draw it. So now we have this coin right here that's on the screen, and we could click and move it around if we wanted to. For example, if I went over to the move tool, we could move it around a little bit, and I'm going to move it down just a bit so it's there, maybe to the right just a little bit. So with it's also the coin highlighted within the hierarchy view, over in its inspector view, I'm going to change its color by clicking on color, sort of a yellowish color, and then drag this over here and make it sort of a darker yellow color and close the color window. And so now we have a coin-ish shape, a circle, that is a separate game object that's within our hierarchy view, that's within our screen. So let's play this. So our text is following our main camera, and we're moving right through the coin, which is sort of not what we want, right? We need to collide with it. So similar to the player game object, if we want to collide things, and similar to the floor game object we had several videos back, it needs some type of collider. And so we can just use the standards we've been using throughout this project of a box collider. So with it highlighted within the hierarchy view, coming over to the inspector view, down to add component, physics 2D, and box collider 2D. And it needs a material, so we're just going to drag and drop the same material we've been using throughout this entire project, new physics material 2D. Okay, so now if we play, and we try to move into it, we're going to get stopped. Well, we know it's colliding, so that's good. That's the first step. But just colliding is not really going to help us a whole lot. We want something to happen when we collide. We want to change something. To do that, we're going to actually have to write some more code. And the code we're going to write is part of the player game object, because we're going to put all of this code that's going to do things as part of that. It's going to be reactions to the player doing stuff that's going to affect other game objects. So the player game code is part of player script. So down here in the project view, I'm going to come down to player script and double click to open Visual Studio. So I need two different things to happen. The first, I need to check to see if something is colliding, and then I need to do something about it. The first of which will happen is, let's make sure that when we're colliding with a coin, the coin disappears. It gets destroyed. So we can do that by using some other built-in methods that are part of a mono behavior. So you notice right here is, if I put the cursor over this, it says is the base class from which every Unity script derives. So it has some built-in methods already. Start, update, fixed update, and late update are all part of these. Some other ones it has are some collision functions we can use, or collision methods. So I'm going to write a new method, void, and start writing on, C, O, L, L, and notice it gives me a drop-down list. OnCollisionEnter, OnCollision2D, OnCollisionExit, OnCollisionExit2D. So these are different options we have. Well, so what I want to happen is when we first collide with the coin, I want something to happen immediately. So what we want then is OnCollisionEnter2D. So now we have OnCollisionEnter2D, and its argument is a collision2D object. What this means is whatever we collide with will be in this object. And so we can look at the object and say, okay, what is this game object we're colliding with? But that still doesn't quite help us, because we could have the type of the object, but we have no way to sort of filter out anything else. Right now, coin is a player object, player is a player game object, the various tile maps are game objects. There's just a whole bunch of game objects around. So we need a way to sort of filter through which thing is which and how we want to deal with that. To deal with that, and to rewind to what I was talking about at the very beginning, is we use tags, which are a central concept we're going to come back to when we also do jumping in just a moment. So we want to do tags. So I'm going to save this, Control S, and I'm going to come back over to Unity so we can talk about tags a little bit. So you may have noticed if you click on any game object within Unity, we'll give Unity just a moment to catch up to me, underneath its name is a section tag. And notice this says untagged. Well, the tag functionality as part of game objects allow us to filter them. That is, we can look for a certain tag it has and then do something on it. So notice this is untagged, which is actually just a tag called untagged, which is not terribly helpful right now. So I'm going to come down to Add Tag, which brings me over to the Tags and Layers section. And it says List is empty. I'm going to click the plus sign. I'm going to call this new tag Coin and save. Well, we can't automatically go back to what we were selecting, so let's select it again from the hierarchy view, come over to tag, and this time come down to coin. So the coin game object has a tag coin. Now that this is set, let's move back to Visual Studio, and now let's test for that and say, okay, if collision collider, so the thing we've collided with, dot tag is equal to coin. Well, what do we want to happen? We want the coin to be destroyed. So we can use another method called destroy. And notice it says remove a game object, component, or asset. So destroy collision collider, collision.collider dot game object. And Control S to save. So now it tests OnCollisionEnter2D, so when collision is just starting, when two things are intersecting, it checks, okay, and the thing I'm colliding with, so collision collider, if its tag is equal to coin, that is, if it's equal to the string coin, what we want to do is destroy the game object associated with the collider that's part of this collision. So whatever we're colliding with, when it first enters it, let's check its tag. If its tag is coin, destroy it, so the coin disappears. So I've saved this, Control S, we'll move back over to Unity, and now let's play this. So moving along, boom, it disappeared, which is exactly what we want to happen. It destroyed the game object that was associated with that collider during that collision. So we're actually get two different collisions going on simultaneous. We're colliding with the floor, and then we collided with the coin. But the floor didn't have that tag, only the coin did. So it checked to see if the thing we're colliding with, if its tag was coin. And it was, so it destroyed it. Well, that's all well and good. This functionality works exactly as we intended to. We can start to collect coins by colliding with them, which will destroy them. But it doesn't really do anything for our score, so let's also think about that code too. So what we want to happen is when we collide with a coin, it gets destroyed, and the other thing that happens is a value gets increased, our current score, and our text that's part of that canvas gets updated. So we sort of already know a way to do this, but it's going to require us thinking through a couple of different steps. So let's move back to Visual Studio. And we want the code to happen in this object. So what I'm going to do is, because we're going to be dealing with text, that I need to make sure that object is part of this script. So I'm going to say using Unity engine.ui. And that'll give us access to text objects. Now I'm going to create a public text called score. And Control S. So similar to the way that we were using the public float speed to change a value in the Unity editor, now we're going to take the same approach by associating the text that's part of the canvas, that's part of the camera, to this value right here, this variable. So now that it's created, let's move back to Unity. I'm going to click on Player and allow Unity a second to catch up to everything. So now when we scroll down, we see speed and we see score, which it expects some type of text object. So if we drag and drop text from the hierarchy view into the inspector view and drop it on here, it's now associated with that. So what this means is we can change the values of that object in this script now. So coming back to Visual Studio, what we want to do is during the start, which will be called in the very first frame, I want to say score dot text is equal to the string 0. And we know it's a string because if we put the cursor over this, we see the text property of this object is a string. So we're going to set it to 0, Control S to save, come back to Unity, and now let's play this. And we notice that new text now changed to the string 0. Okay, so everything's working. So now we want to make sure this score gets changed. Well, we can't really deal with strings. We can convert them back and forth, but it'd be easier to just make a private integer called score value, and we can set it initially to 0. And down here, instead of the string 0, we can say score value and use a built-in method called toString to convert the integer value to a string value. Okay, well that's good, and so the initial value 0 will be set, so new text will be overwritten with 0, the initial score value, when it's converted to string on the very first frame. We also want to update score value whenever a collision happens. So inside this conditional right here, let's update score value plus equals to 1, which says score value is equal to score value plus 1, so we're increasing score value by 1. Then we're going to say score text is equal to score value to string. So each time we're increasing score value by 1, and then we're changing score text to the string version of the integer value, and then we're destroying the coin. So Control S to save. Let's move back to Unity. Now it's caught up. Let's click play. We see it's initially changed the value of 0, and if I move into that coin, boom, now it's 1, so our score value increased by 1 and the coin disappeared, which is exactly what we want to happen. So coming out of play mode. So we've basically got our collecting down. We can add new game objects and give them the tag coin. As long as they have the tag coin, the OnCollisionStay2D method within the player game object knows to check. Is the thing I'm colliding with, check its tag. If its tag is coin, increase the score value and delete that game object, or destroy it, that is. So those are pretty common. That's pretty standard. And in fact, we can duplicate this. If I right-click on coin within the hierarchy view and duplicate, and then move it over a little bit, and play, we can create the same thing again. So now we're moving over. Coin 1, coin 2, and notice they got destroyed and removed from the hierarchy. So if we wanted to add more coins or more things to collect that were like coins, all we'd have to do is set their tag. And we just check to see, okay, if the thing we're colliding with has a tag that is whatever, in this project it's coin, then we go ahead and increase the score value, and we destroy it. And we could add multiple coins all over the rest of this if we wanted to, following a similar method and making sure they have the tag coin, because that's all we really care about. And in fact, we could just duplicate these a number of different times and add them throughout this new level, following the same idea and making sure that A, they have the tag coin, and B, they have a box collider 2D, so the collider events happen. Now, the other thing I mentioned way at the beginning of this video is we're also going to talk about jumping, and I said that jumping follows a similar idea. It does, and one way to approach jumping is to also work with tags. So I added the tag coin for coins, but we can also add a tag to the floor called ground. So within its tag, I've got floor selected, this tile map selected within the hierarchy view. Within the inspector view, I'm going to tag, add tag. Within tags and labels, add a new tag, and call this ground. I could also just call it floor. So coming back over to floor, coming back over the inspector view, and this time selecting ground. So now our floor tile map has the tag ground, which means all of its tiles also have the tag ground. Now let's move back to Visual Studio, and now we want to think through a slightly different method. Well, we knew that when we first collided with the coin, we wanted it to do something. So that was on collision entered, when the collision was first happening. But for the ground, we're basically staying in constant collision with it, more or less. We're almost always on the ground. And so that's a slightly different method. So in this case, if I start typing again, we see our new list. And this time I want OnCollisionStay2D. And this is because we're going to stay. It's going to keep touching over and over and over again, but we're going to follow a very similar idea that we just used for the coins. In this case, however, if collision collider tag is equal to ground, so we know we're touching the floor, or we're touching tiles that have the tag ground. Okay, so now we want to do a jump. Well, to do a jump, we're going to have to associate it with a button. I'm going to choose arbitrarily W, but it can also be the up arrow or anything else we want. So to do that, we're going to have to check to see if that key is being pressed. We can do that through input, get key, and then we need key code, and then any key code that Unity is aware of, and I'm going to just use W. So okay, we're on collision stay, which means a collision is keep happening. We know the thing we're colliding with has the tag ground, which we know currently is the tile map floor. And we know that these two things are happening and the user is pressing the W key, which means they want to jump. Well, here is where we come back to physics and forces. Earlier, we were getting the access within the fixed update, getting the horizontal or vertical axes, and then adding some type of force to it. And depending on what direction we're going, that's what was happening. Well, down here, we want to follow a very similar idea. So we want to say the same rigid body, we're going to add force again. This time, we're going to add a new vector 2. We're adding 0 on the horizontal, and this time we want to add 3 on the vertical. Well, as I mentioned at the very top, with gravity applied, this is not as useful as it may seem. We could keep adding force by pressing the button, but again, that would just sort of keep fighting gravity. Instead, what we want to do is we want an impulsive force, so a sudden force that's enacted, and then gravity takes effect, which is more like we jump, right? We jump up, and then gravity pulls us back down. So I'm going to use the second parameter, and notice it immediately kicks into force mode 2D, and I want to use impulse. So as I mentioned, this is going to be a sudden force, an impulse, and then gravity will take effect. So if we're on collision stay, we're colliding with something continuously. If the thing we're colliding with continuously has the tag ground, which we currently know are the tiles associated with the tile map floor, then we check to see if we're pressing the W key. If we are, we're going to add a new force of 3 to the vertical using impulse, so a sudden impulse force. Control S to save that. We'll come back to Unity. Okay, Unity's caught up. So now let's play this. And now we can jump. And as long as I'm colliding with the floor, I can jump. But I can't jump off the walls. I have to wait till I come back to the floor, which means we're on collision staying. There's a multiple collisions. The thing we're colliding with is the floor, and we know because it has the tag ground. And we can't jump off the walls, which is good, because we don't want to jump off the walls. And we can jump around, and whenever we collide with things, on collision enter to a coin, score gets increased, our number gets increased on the screen, and then the coin object gets destroyed. So, we've finally got around to doing the two things I promised at the beginning of this video, jumping and collecting, both of which I said tied together on the concept of tags. And they did. In each case, we were using the built-in collision methods that are part of the game objects as part of mono behaviors. We're also using their tags to see which of the various things we could be colliding with we are colliding with. If it was part of a coin, we knew it had the tag coin. If it was part of the ground, we knew it had the tag ground, and so we acted accordingly. Coming back over the code, we saw on collision enter, if there's first the start of the collision, we detected, is this a coin? If it is, we increased the score value, we updated the score text, and then we destroyed that game object. If we kept colliding with something, we checked, hey, is the thing I keep colliding with, is this the ground? And if it is, it means it has a tag ground. Then we double check to see if we're pressing the W key. If we are, then we go ahead and add a new vector force using a vertical 3 and impulse, which adds an instant force using its mass. This again is different than the normal add force we had been using, which was continuous over time. This does an instant impulse and allows us to jump with the gravity affecting us in the next frame. So we've got these two different concepts going on, as well as additional uses of tags, again either coin or ground. And we realized, of course, we can keep adding new game objects, coins, that are either duplicates or look like this, as long as they have the tag coin and some type of collider. Unity will detect that and check to say, hey, is the thing I'm colliding with a coin because it has a tag coin? If so, like I said, update the score, delete it. Finally, to rewind a little bit towards back to the beginning, we added a new text game object which allows us to update the text. We did that through creating a new UI game element or game object text from the hierarchy view. When we did that, it automatically added a canvas for us, similar to in a previous video when we attempted to create a tile map, and it automatically added a grid for us as well. We then dragged the canvas up to the camera and made it a child. And we did this so that it transforms will be affected. So whenever the camera is affected, the canvas will be affected, and then the text will be affected as well. So we can chain those all together. And the camera is affected because in the previous video, we added code to move the camera when the player game object moves as well. And so we're sort of building all these concepts together here. So, as a reminder, in this video, we talked a lot about tags, but they helped us to talk about jumping and collecting, the two more abstract concepts covered in this video. But tags is its central idea, and we quickly realized that if we click on any game object, they all have the possibility to have tags. This one, as a text game object, can have a tag, tile maps can have tags, and of course, our coins we've been using have the tag coin. So it's common to all game objects, but now we're actually using this in practice, either checking to see if this is ground or this is coin and acting accordingly using the built-in methods that are part of every game object, OnCollisionEnter2D and OnCollisionStay2D, to check to see if this is the first initial collision, if things are just intersecting, or if they've been colliding multiple times and then acting accordingly. If it's a coin, updating and destroying the coin, or if it's ground, allowing us to check to see if we're pressing the W key and then allowing us to jump. Both of them tied to tags, and both of them part of the more abstract concepts of jumping and collecting. Thanks for watching.